tangible past is preserved right under people's feet. It's amazing to think that evidence, traces of people's lives 1,500 years ago are preserved 2 inches under the surface that we're walking around on now.
The mother of Front Range sites.
One of the most important archaeological sites in the Denver region.
Before Magic Mountain, archaeologists didn't have a really good idea about what cultural phases looked like on the Front Range.
It's incredible to think about how long these sites were occupied.
To go through the history and to find out who was here, what their lifestyle was like. I think it's important to keep the history alive.
This place is a special place. There's just some sort of energy about it. It is a magical place.
This program was made possible by the History Colorado State Historical Fund,
supporting projects throughout the state to preserve, protect, and interpret Colorado's architectural and archaeological treasures. History Colorado State Historical Fund. Create the future, honor the past.
with additional funding provided in memory of Deanna E. LaCamera, the Benedict Family Foundation in memory of Dr. Jim Benedict, and members like you. With special thanks to the Denver Public Library, History Colorado, the Colorado Office of Film, Television, and Media, and to these organizations.
No one is surprised that Colorado is a popular place to move. Well, it's been popular for thousands of years. The word has gotten out a long time ago.
We know very little about the culture of the people that lived thousands of years ago in Colorado, but we do know something about how they lived. We do know something about the kinds of plants and animals they harvested, how they moved across the landscape, where they'd been and where they were going to. They're all hunter-gatherers, but they changed how they utilized the landscape over time. It was adapting to changes in technology, adapting to changes in climate, and it was adapting to who else was on the landscape with them.
There are different groups of people, probably related and interacting in different ways, all up and down the Front Range.
Up to near Fort Collins, all the way down through Douglas County, you get these outcroppings of rocks that happened from the geologic lift millions of years ago, but you've got these really nice protected microclimates that are back there.
It's a little bit warmer than the plains, and it's also warmer than the mountains, and you're sort of protected in that hogback valley. You're right next to a water source, and so it creates this really comfortable place to live.
So Native Americans have obviously known about this for thousands of years.
This particular location has been a crossroads forever. It's right at the intersection of the mountains and the plains, so there's kind of this nexus happening.
That connection to the land continued through time, not only through the native peoples who lived there, but then on into the time when settlers were here trying to get up into the mountains. This became a gateway to the mountains, a place where people could resupply before they headed over the hills to the mining towns.
The only way that we can answer questions about the deep past, long before there were historical records and long before the social memory of tribal groups, is to use archaeology to answer them. There's an amazing amount of archaeology in the ground all around Colorado, and finding those archaeological sites is key to answering the questions.
And that's what's really exciting, because then you start to knit it together and we're able to start connecting the dots. The area that we know as Magic Mountain was a big part of the geography of the Colorado Gold Rush. When you think of settlement, big cities and settlements really happen on bays, on access to water, or on riverways. In Colorado, you want to be set up close to the mountains. So as individuals who were coming here for the gold rush after the discoveries in 1858 and 1859, there's the crush of people who are coming out of the Denver region. And Golden is known as one of the last flat spaces before you hit the Rocky Mountains, so it was a really big popular space as a start-off point.
We do know that there was a town called Apex.
You could go right charging up through the middle, through Apex. It would take you directly up through a natural canyon there that had existed for thousands of years. As the Anglo settlers came in, they just started taking over these different pieces of land. It didn't take very long for these settlers to start to discover that they were actually Native American objects on their property.
And we do have some newspaper accounts that mention that there was an archaeological site.
They'd find pottery shards or projectile points.
Between the 1860s and the 1920s, archaeology was very much in its infancy. We didn't have the best practices and the ethics that we have today.
That meant the loss of a lot of important archaeological evidence that sort of ended up on people's mantelpieces. You lose all that context. But people didn't know that at the time.
We don't actually see formal archaeology for quite some time. In the 1930s, volunteers and associates with the Denver Museum of Nature and Science were out at the site and picked up some artifacts and brought them back to the museum. This was the first artifacts that went from the Apex site into a museum. In 1940 and 1941, museum-affiliated archaeologists Betty and Harold Husher went out to the site to kind of do some more formal studies, but this was still really early in the age of archaeology, and what they did was not really up to the standards that we would expect today. We still have some of those artifacts here, but they didn't leave us very much information on what they found. So for the next 20 years or so, the site was not touched by professional archaeologists. Cynthia Irwin Williams had been a mentee of Hannah Marie Wormington, who was the first curator at the museum. And Wormington had done all kinds of archaeology in this region. She was really a formative figure in Colorado archaeology. And Irwin Williams grew up really underneath of her, coming to the museum all the time, really soaking it all in. Cynthia Irwin Williams and her brother knew about the Apex site, and they realized that it could offer more context to the regional archaeology, so that's when they decided to do the excavation.
They opened up what we call block units, and they're just these really immense big squares that they were taking down level by level.
They didn't necessarily find a lot of features or structures, but they really were able to look at the stratigraphic levels, so those different levels of dirt and soils and how that built up over time, and find different kinds of tools associated with those different levels.
The Irwins provided a foundation that allowed other archaeologists to look at other sites and compare and contrast it. And so it was the foundation that allowed us to take information from other sites and other time periods and start building a more complex narrative of prehistory on the Front Range.
From the landscape perspective, everything changed in the 1950s.
In 1955, Disneyland opens in California, and it is almost immediately a huge success. There were a few different splinter groups, including one that was called the Magic Mountain Company, that wanted to create these sort of satellite knockoff Disney-inspired parks. This company came to the Denver area. They started planning in the late 1950s to create this space in the Golden area they called Magic Mountain. It was this huge behemoth idea. There was a storybook land. There was, of course, was a huge western area. There was a main street downtown. So it was a huge park, and it was an incredibly costly endeavor. So major undertaking that really was not resourced enough from the outset. They finally actually opened on June 30th of 1960.
Irwin Williams changed the name to Magic Mountain because it was right in that same time frame, late 1950s, when Magic Mountain Corporation had bought up all of that land and was developing the amusement park. So that's why the site was changed from Apex site to Magic Mountain.
It operates for about 3 months. It closes after Labor Day, and it never reopens.
When the amusement park bought the land, they channelized Apex Creek so that it's now very straight and diverted water from the way that it naturally flowed, we now see all kinds of trees out there, which were never there before. And so the landscape really changed dramatically just in the last 60 years or so. In the late 1970s, the housing development that sits right next to the site was just starting to be constructed.
That entire hillside and that entire creek bed were going to have houses built on top of it.
There are bulldozers coming up to practically the site, and some folks realized that this could threaten the archaeological site. And so they were able to nominate it for the National Register of Historic Places.
It's not a protection measure, but it's the sort of designation that allows a local municipality like Golden to say, you're right, this is important to us as a community, it's important to the state and to the nation.
That really ensured the protection of the site for generations to come. We really did have a chance that it would be lost without that nomination.
The first archaeological grants for Magic Mountain were given in 1994 and 1996 to Centennial Archaeology by the State Historical Fund. One of the things that they found in the course of their excavations were rock walls. This was really rather stunning because it indicated that people were staying put at Magic Mountain much longer than we'd previously thought. Kind of the model that people had in their heads was that people were camping in different areas and moving on pretty quickly. But these walls indicate that people were staying put probably for entire seasons.
I started at the museum as a curator in 2013, and it was really a dream of mine to be able to do public archaeology and get the public involved in this thing I'm so super passionate about.
Michelle Coons approached me about the possibility of doing a collaborative project between Paleocultural Research Group and the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. We both have interests in citizen science. We both have a lot of common interests in the archaeology of the region, and so we got our heads together and started thinking about the questions we were most interested in answering and how we might work together. And that was the beginning of the Magic Mountain Project. We want to know something about the past. And so all of the field work we do, all the pre-field work we do is guided by our research design, by the questions we want to ask.
Where you're going to be excavating, why you're excavating there, and when it's going to be appropriate to stop. So not only for answering your questions, but for future preservation of the site.
One of the things that's been really big for field archaeology has been the development of what are called remote sensing technologies or geophysical survey technologies to get some sense of what the subsurface looks like without excavating. It makes us more efficient in the field, and it's really a conservation measure. It's really a step-by-step process, starting with big questions and then focusing in on what kind of archaeology is there in the ground that allows us to answer them. Many of the questions that we started with were based on prior work at the site.
One of the major shifts we've seen in 21st century science is this attempt to engage the citizens and engage the public. For archaeologists, one of the primary ways that they do this is through what we call public archaeology programs that really allows the public to actually do archaeology. So they're allowed to come in and they're allowed to get messy and dirty and to dig up this significant material culture. They're also expected to take on the responsibility of taking notes and writing down what they see and doing things in the appropriate methods so that we know that there's integrity to that scientific data. And there's public archaeology programs all over the country, but this one with Magic Mountain is really special. The scale and the scope of this project is the largest that I know of. It really gives us a better picture than the traditional 20th century idea of the single expert who is usually giving his interpretation of what he sees, and that's the end-all be-all. Human life is messy, and it's always been messy, and it's always been complicated, and it's always been diverse, and so we need that diversity of the public, of experts, of people with different identities and different positionalities, throwing their opinions and their ideas in.
We reached out to families so that they could get up there and spend the day with our archaeologists to really get a feel for something that they might not otherwise have had a chance to do. We reached out to our volunteers. Some of our volunteers would be doing the archaeological work, and those are the ones who came to us with background and expertise in archaeological techniques and digging.
There were 70 volunteers in some capacities over the 2 seasons that we were really out there. And oh my gosh, volunteers are just vital to the whole process. Like, we could not do this without volunteers.
We opened up the tours to all of the public. There are people for whom this is right in their backyard, and they had no idea this kind of archaeological site was there. The tours were for free, and they could learn about the area, learn about the archaeology, see the site, and then ultimately dig themselves. There were university groups at the time who were also coming out there and lending information to the site. In addition, we wanted to reach out to youth groups who wouldn't have an opportunity otherwise to get access to this kind of site.
Prior to the project, we sent out letters to representatives of all of the tribes that have historical affiliation with the state of Colorado, inviting them to come to the dig to share with us their thoughts on the history of the site, their particular associations with their tribes. We had representatives from 5 different tribes come, and from some of those conversations in 2017, we started the teen internship for 2018 to bring in Native teens to help out on the project.
I'm Native American, I'm Navajo and Lakota. The area was Indigenous land, so I thought that was really cool to be exploring the land that people who are Indigenous of this land lived in. The Native Teen Internship provides opportunities for students in high school, and when they were describing it to me, you're going to be looking at artifacts, you're going to be out in the field actually working with the people who do this, hands-on doing it yourself. I just thought that was something I should take advantage of and do. It sounded cool. And not a lot of teens in general, and especially Native teens, have experiences and opportunities to take advantage of, like archaeology and excavating.
These were incredible days.
We had over 3,000 people come visit the site.
I was out there for 5 days a week for June and July in the summer of 2018. I learned that you need to have perseverance and work really hard and, have fun as well, because we're working like 10 hours a day on the field.
The kids were sifting for things and they were playing around with these archaeological techniques. It's a great space like that to really understand how fragile some of the archaeological finds can be. So we'd have the sieves that they could use, but instead of archaeological objects, we would use potato chips. Then when they went up to work with the archaeologists, they'd have that firmly in their experience, and they could be very, very gentle as they were trying those techniques.
You would look for any little minerals, any projectile points, bones, anything like that. And then if you found something, you would take it and then they would examine to make sure it's, not just a rock. It's just exciting because you're just digging all day, and then when you finally find something, it's like the prize of the day or something.
It's like addicting, right? You're like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. There's this piece of the puzzle that I may be able to fit it in where it belongs. It kind of bites you like a bug, right?
But sometimes the emotion is frustrating. As archaeologists, we struggle with navigating that line between investigating something scientifically and preserving it. One of the complexities of archaeology is that it's ultimately destructive. Today, we're really mindful of making sure that we're collecting enough data and digging enough holes that we can answer our research questions, but that we're also protecting the site for future researchers.
The key thing is what archaeologists call context. It's not the artifacts themselves, it's how they're associated. What artifacts are associated with living areas, features, fire hearths.
Typically, once something is dug up, once it is taken out of those layers of dirt, unless that information is written down, it loses all context. And so you can't actually simply just put stuff back in the hole it came out of.
We knew from prior work that there had been extensive disturbance at the site, and so we expected it. As it happened, the part of the site we were working in is almost pristine. That was a big surprise. How intact, how pristine the archaeological deposits are makes Magic Mountain an incredible resource. When Michelle and I first started thinking about this project, we had a couple of big goals. One of the goals, and probably the most important goal, was to understand a time period that archaeologists call the early ceramic, from about 200 CE to about 1000. And it was a time of really important social and technological and economic change. New technologies were introduced. The bow and arrow came in, pottery came in. People began using the landscape in a really different way. And they organized their social groups in a different way. And so it's a really dynamic period, and we just don't know that much about it in Colorado.
We know that there was lots of reuse of this site. We know these people were mobile people for the most part, and so what does that look like? Is it a seasonal use only, or were they there year-round? And these are some of the things that we're still grappling with. Some of our radiocarbon dates are showing that some of these fire pits that we found were used that whole span, and so people were constantly using this site.
So it was a very stable system. They enjoyed, in general, a fairly good climate. The early ceramic was a good time to be a Coloradoan, and we see that at Magic Mountain. So one of our main goals was to understand the early ceramic. The other goal was to understand the earliest occupation at the site. Old sediment, old dirt is hard to find.
And so in 3 parts of the site, we dug really deep. And it was in one of those really deep layers, we were able to correlate radiocarbon dates from the soil that we found and realize that we had artifacts that matched up to that layer. And we were able to say, wow, people were here at this particular time period.
About 9,000 years old. That's special.
And it is like a needle in the haystack to find that kind of association.
And that gives us a window onto that early occupation in Colorado. It's a time period that archaeologists call the late Paleo-Indian period. Thousands of years after the first American Indians arrived in Colorado, but it's still a deep time period that we don't understand very much about. We know that they were bison hunters, and we know that they moved across the landscape, but because very few of their sites are preserved, we don't know very much about where they came from, what they were doing when they were here. A bit of a mystery. Magic Mountain might give us a window on that earliest time period. We're continuing to work on the project. We have discoveries in the field, but a lot of the hard work of archaeology happens in the lab. We'll try to answer as best we can the questions that we started with.
We have ceramics from the ceramic period, the different kinds of stone tools.
We have a piece of ground stone for grinding, usually some kind of vegetal material.
Most of what we're seeing happens to be local for this time period, and so we're thinking, well, maybe they weren't as mobile as we once thought.
Every field project always generates new questions, new surprises. It's the nature of science, right? You discover things that you didn't know before. It really never ends. We're trying to understand Native American occupations that were contemporaneous with Magic Mountain, and we want to compare them. The story really lies in that sort of buildup of context, not only within a site, but across sites that are occupied at the same time. We also want to look at the sequence of sites through time to see how things changed.
So, maybe we'll be going back to Magic Mountain. We have a lot of archaeological evidence from 2018 and the years before still to analyze, but we have literally scraped the surface.
But we know that things are going to change. The process of archaeological research is going to change. But the piece that we're working on today is part of that long chain of understanding that builds up over time. And that's why preservation is so important.
One of the discussions that we've been having was how best to preserve the site, to protect it, but also to let people know that it's there.
There's kind of 2 schools of thought in archaeology. There's this ignorance is best, ignorance is bliss, and we won't let anyone know that this archaeological site is right under people's feet.
But if you don't have these places where people can come and be inspired, how are you ever going to get your message across that they're worth saving? And I think that that's what the value of something like Mesa Verde does. And really, I think that's kind of what has been emerging at Magic Mountain, is that this is inspirational.
We're sort of taking this approach, well, if people are excited by it, they're going to want to protect it. They're going to want it to be there for their grandchildren and for generations to come.
As a result, the Magic Mountain Community Archaeology Project has won the Award for Excellence in Public Education from the Society for American Archaeology. That's a big deal. That's what's going to preserve archaeology in the long term is the citizens of the state, of the country, caring about it.
We're all in this together, and we all have responsibility to protect the cultural heritage and to be able to be good stewards of the past, to just be aware of that relationship with artifacts and what they might mean in context versus what they mean on your mantle, and think about how that is a little tiny piece of a much bigger puzzle.
The archaeology that's in the ground in Colorado, it's really our only direct, tangible connection to the distant past of the state. And how people made a living here in the past, it matters. We should care about how climate change and how technological change and how social change affected people in the past. We're still subject to all those forces, and understanding how people coped with changes like that in the past is relevant to us. It's also important to preserve the heritage of the people that have called Colorado home for thousands of years.
And a project like this doesn't exist in a vacuum, or doesn't exist in isolation. It exists as part of a long, long history of connection.
Magic Mountain is not one thing. It's the story of many people.
Magic Mountain really talks about the continuous changing nature of Colorado.
Having that appreciation and depth of understanding that we're not the first people here really does make us better people today.
At the end of the day, it's about people. It's about understanding ourselves and who we are today and how we got here, and why it's really important for us to take care of each other and take care of our world that we all share and that we are stewards of for a very short period of time.